It's been an amazing 2016 for me for a lot of different reasons, but before I get going on my topic, which is compete and compete with confidence, I want to introduce you to a few people that have been the basis of why I am who I am, because I think it's important you know who I am in order to understand why I do what I do. So up in the top right, you see my sister with the white sweater. She was our goal academically growing up. She set the standards. The guy above her is my brother. He set it for me athletically. Being the youngest of three, you could tell I had to compete a little bit in that household. The two folks to the left up top are just amazing parents. And for me, growing up in Buffalo, New York, where I think the weather speaks for itself, right? What I learned was that Wenzel Tough, which we jokingly said is our brand, is that we're blue-collar work ethic, white-collar mentality. We are faithful, we're focused on our family, we're loyal, and we're humble. And with that, I got a pretty good background because of the folks behind you. The reason I'm willing to be up here today probably are because of the young girls that you saw. Those are my nieces. And what I know is that I have to take some steps out there in order to make things a little bit different. So my talk today is about competing, but not competing in the athletic sense of the word. What you see behind you is the acronym for what I mean for compete. And so I'm going to start with the C with communication. And for me, growing up pretty much an introvert for most of my life, I didn't think I was a really great communicator because I'd rather sit and observe and listen than actually talk and tell people what to do. But what I learned in my adult phase here is that 80% of communication is nonverbal. So I actually was a really good communicator. I just was taking it all in. I was listening and learning when some of the other folks were talking. And so what I've worked to do over the last probably 20 years, certainly the last 15 between Georgia Tech and the Dream, really is learn how to verbalize what's up here in my mind. Looking at the O for optimistic, I'm an idealist who's a realist who's the eternal optimist. That's not always the easy thing to do. I will tell you, growing up, I was very much the realist. I'm very, very, very literal. I'm a very data-driven person. But I was fortunate because those folks, my parents that I talked about, when I was going through college, they said, Theresa, if you could do anything and money wasn't an issue, what would you do? And my response was, that's just completely unrealistic, right? I'm like, you got to have a paycheck. But after like 3 or 4 times of that being asked, I'm like, okay, guys, I get it. I got to start thinking forward and not worry about just today. But what I did do was I always looked in the rearview mirror. And at times I looked back and I didn't always like what I saw. But what I learned from my parents was to start seeing what I really liked when I looked in the mirror. And then I started looking forward with the vision, and what I saw were the things that were not impossible anymore, but very possible. And so we took it and said, okay, let's maximize. If you talk to my father even today, he's always saying, Theresa, make it a great day. I'm like, Dad, I got it. All right? I know I'm in control. Control your controllables, I got it. And for me, that's been a saying that I've been nonstop with. But what I had to do was get some reconciliation because I grew up very blue collar, and now I'm a little more white collar. And so I had to look and listen to people, and we've heard it throughout the course of today. It's not about where you came from. It's about what's inside. And so I found it fascinating having gone from blue-collar Buffalo, New York, to down here at Georgia Tech and really kind of high status, is what do people see? And I'm always fascinated because you know what? I don't look at what you see visually. I look at what's inside. And it's not about who's the top person. It's about who makes the team go forward. And so for me, it's not about better or worse. It's about being equal and fair. So let's take the last 4. Passion, I think I've talked about, is I was very focused, loved athletics, and so I was able to learn how to compete, but I was able to do something I absolutely loved, which is athletics. I've been doing athletics since I was 5 years old in some organized fashion. I've been very fortunate in how I've transitioned through that. Enthusiasm, being an introvert, it was real. I'm not a cheerleader, but I've coached college basketball and I've coached college golf at the Division I level. So I've learned how to use my voice, and I've learned how to use the inflection to get people to do things I want them to do, even when they don't have any desire to do it. Tenacity, I would tell you, in prepping for this speech, the conversation was had, well, that's not really associated with women. And for me, I really had to take a step back because it's been part of my brand since I was in my 20s. And so for me, that's being disciplined, it's being persistent, it's being relentless. And when I get something set in my head, I'm all right going after it. And we've talked about the different words, and I've been called a pit bull before, and so I'm like, well, I had a pug growing up, is that close enough? And then the idea of being excellent and not perfect. It's growing up, I used to be told, Perfect practice makes perfect. And so I always tried to be perfect. And then I realized, you know what? It's unattainable. As human beings, that is just not something you can do. So now I've settled on excellent. And within that, here's the 4 versions, my main stops within my career in athletics. And where I would tell you it was a sport, it's a business. And where sport is life, life is sport. And so you've learned a lot of different things. I have left 2 of those positions without having a job. That's something a lot of people don't know about me. So the Canisius to the Siena, when I started at Canisius, I started as a GA and within 2 weeks got hired and promoted to assistant coach. I was like, wow, that's great. A nice step. Then I went from Canisius to Siena because when I left a job without having a job, it was generally, or when I left jobs, it was for 2 reasons. One, I stopped growing, and or I stopped philosophically believing in whoever was my supervisor or my leader. And because I'm loyal, it's easier for me to walk away than to be disloyal. So I left Canisius, went to Siena. I spent 3 months without having a job. But when I left Canisius, I actually thought I was one of 2 candidates for a head Division I coaching job. And I thought, this is what I want to do, because when I went for the interview, they're like, we're going to have you play Pat Summitt. Well, I'm like, that's great. I love Pat. You know, like she was my mentor. Didn't happen. I just still don't know why it happened. Actually, I do. Because when I started at Siena, I was fortunate enough that I started at the same time with a gentleman called Paul Hewitt. So Paul ended up being the men's basketball coach at Siena. He had 3 phenomenal years. And then guess where he was recruited to? Georgia Tech, right? So 2000, Paul comes in, gives me a call and says, hey, I'm just checking on my people. I'm like, oh, one of Paul's people. That's pretty cool. He's one of the classiest guys I know. And he said, you know, and I said, what's up, coach? And he goes, well, I just wanted to see if you had any interest in coming to Atlanta. I'm like, Atlanta? Yeah, for sure. Because I grew up in the Northeast, went to school in the Midwest. All that snow I was really happy to get out of. But I came down and I visited and I loved it. The only thing was I wasn't passionate about the position. So I turned it down out of respect for him. We stayed in touch, and 5 years later, I got the phone call again. This time, initially it wasn't for a job, but he was calling about a recruit, and they said, oh, by the way, one of these 2 positions is going to open up. So I sent my stuff in, and in 2005, I ended up at Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech was one of the most incredible experiences of my life because it taught me how to compete. And I thought I knew how to compete athletically, for sure. But when you go from the Northeast down to a campus where it's 70% male and 30% female, you learn how to compete. And then when you get the title of SWA, which is Senior Women Administrator, and with that, you now become the Title IX Coordinator and Specialist. I was a specialist in gender and minority issues. I learned how to compete. And so I spent 10 great years, 11 great years at Georgia Tech, and in January 4th, 2016, it's been one heck of a year. That was the day I left Georgia Tech. And ironically, the coaches had a nice going away party for me. Well, at that going away party, one of the co-owners of the Atlanta Dream was there because her and her husband are some of the biggest donors to Georgia Tech. And so I walk in, surprised, emotional. I'm not an emotional person, and I was emotional. First thing out of my mouth, I can't say right now because I did not want to be emotional in front of everybody. So I took a beeline to the bathroom, came back, and then within 5 minutes, I had the head coach from Georgia Tech coming up and saying, I think I got your next job for you. And I'm like, okay, that's not funny. It's not a funny day for me. She's like, no, I'm being serious. Mary Brock needs a president. She goes, I'm doing your negotiating for me. I go, that's even worse. But as luck would have it, Mary seriously was interested in me as the president of the Dream. So then, now here I am, right? I had the worst day of my life, turned into the best day of my life. But I had to have some confidence going through all of that. Every time I left, I had to do something a little bit different. And for me, it was about competing because those 7 elements became really important to how I do and what I do. But it's also, I had the foundation with my family to help me understand, you know what, when you have passion and you have purpose, you can do pretty much anything. And especially if you have faith over fear. How many people have fear hold them back because they're just flat out afraid? And that's something that I would tell you is that leading the Dream, we're one of 12 WNBA teams here across the country. There are 144 young ladies that get to do what they get to do. The amount of exposure for women's athletics is less than 5%. You can see the challenge, I can see all the opportunity because I'm an idealist who's a realist who's the eternal optimist. And so I would tell you, if you haven't been to a dream game, folks, you need to get there. But two, it's not about what happens to you, it's about how you respond. But I had to learn how to compete, but then I also had to learn how to use my confidence. And confidence isn't a destination that you arrive at. Because I can tell you, I was outside pacing because I really don't like to do public speaking because I'm an introvert. But those two little girls up front, they think I'm the coolest aunt in the world because within, 8 months I became a president, I'm doing a TED Talk. Life's really good. So this book, I just need to share with you because in the fall of 2015, when things started happening, one of my mentors gave me this book. And I have been through so many different things. I've been through a death of a student athlete, arrest of a coach. I mean, you name it. My spectrum used to be like this. Now my gray area is like this. My spectrum is bigger than the stage. So I could handle pressure. But when you face sometimes losing something that you love, and I'm not saying someone you love because that's the important stuff. Jobs, stuff can be replaced. But the pressure when you start feeling with it, this book was one of those things that made me realize, hey, take a step back. It's not about what happens to you, it's about how you respond. And so I brought the guy that actually wrote the book in to talk to the student athletes at Georgia Tech. It was awesome because I was learning at the same time. But then he interviewed me because he wanted to know about women and executive women that have gone through some difficult things. And so the biggest thing that's come out of that is it's not that we don't know how to do things, or not that we don't know how to do them at a really high level. The thing that sometimes we lack the most is confidence. So what I want you to take out of today is not only how to learn how to compete with those 7 elements, but I really want you to learn how to do that with confidence. And understand when you look in the mirror, you can look backwards, but don't live in the past. When you look at the mirror you're actually seeing yourself in, see all the good things, because you want to be the idealist who's the realist, who's the eternal optimist. So thank you very much.